So I haven't been looking at anything regarding Dragon Age Veilguard ever since I learned the release date, because I didn't want any spoilers, because BioWare has a habit of spoiling their own games, or whoever's in charge of the advertisements does. But then this fell into my range of vision and concern. The fact that people were saying Dragon Age Veilguard will only import 3 choices from Inquisition, and not even the entirety of Inquisition, but mostly centralized around the events of Trespasser, the DLC. You choose who you romanced, you choose what happened to the Inquisition, and you choose if you decided to stop Solus at all costs or try to redeem him. That's it. That's all you import. This is the one thing I have seen that could actually just kill this game and BioWare as a whole, because if this is true and this is how they are handling the choices, only giving you this 3 for the entirety of the game, they just removed the most unique aspect of their company. That was it, was the choices being imported and how many different choices got imported from game to game to game. So if they just scrapped that because it got too hard, instead of just tying everything up in this game, tying up all their loose ends, and then restarting, doing a clean slate in a game that takes place in a completely different age, they messed up big. And here's the thing. You can't fix this with a patch. You can't fix this with DLC. Other issues that BioWare has had in games, they tried to patch in or DLC stuff to make it not as bad. But you cannot fix only 3 choices being imported into a game that is now finished. That's not how anything works, because the whole hype around Veilguard didn't have anything to do with the gameplay, the art style, character creators, whatever. The main hype around Veilguard and Dreadwolf when it was first announced was what is gonna be the consequences of the choices we have made so far. Because this is being played up to be the ultra apocalypse that is hitting Thetis. So what is all the little tweaks to the story we've made gonna explode into and come back to haunt us in this new game? People have been speculating on who's gonna show up with every announcement of where we're going to be able to visit. Oh, this person could show up. Oh, maybe it's about these people. And then oh, wait, this storyline happened in this game, so this could come into play. You literally killed all of that with just those 3 choices. Literally, if this had been announced at the very beginning, I bet you they wouldn't have got half the amount of pre-orders and excited people talking about this than they have now. Because that has been the main thing everyone has been talking about in a positive light for this game, was how the choices were going to be played out. So let's talk about the reasoning behind this now. There's a few different reasons it seems that they have to do this. And one of them was because they didn't want to overwhelm new players. Okay, that's never been a problem before. In Inquisition, you had a default world state that you could just start from, and that didn't really seem to impact anyone's ability to enjoy that game and its story for what it was. You just didn't get the extra little bit from playing the past games, and if anything, it encouraged people to buy the previous games to see what happened earlier on in the timeline. I don't know why that would be an issue. Another thing they touched upon was saying they didn't want to just have the choices amount to codex entry or just a one-off line somewhere. And I call BS on that because one of the choices they decided to include can only be a one-off line or a codex entry, and that's who you romanced in Inquisition. Who the Inquisitor decided to be with as a romantic partner can only be a one-off line or codex entry, or just not be involved at all. There's so many different variables for the characters and how they end up at the end of Inquisition. To just choose who you romance doesn't make any sense, because a lot of them can't even show up in this game, because Cassandra could be the new divine. She could be off doing something else. Blackwall could be dead. Maybe he can show up at Wysop. Like, Cullen definitely is not showing back up. Sarah probably isn't going to show back up. She could, because Sarah's wild card, but most of these characters aren't going to have any meaningful appearance from being chosen as a romance. So that's just not true. There's no way that you incorporated that choice in a meaningful way. The only way you could have made it any way meaningful was the one for Solus. It only counts for the Solus romance. That's it. No other character. Because Solus is one of the main antagonists in Veilguard. Whether or not you romanced him would play a somewhat big part in this new game if you had like an Inquisitor that was more involved with him in Inquisition. All the other characters are gonna be one-liners or codex entries. So that also doesn't make any sense for you to make that choice. And then another reason they said that there are less choices from the previous games in this one was because you're in Northern Thetis and all the other events happened in Southern Thetis, and so it wouldn't make sense for them to affect the North in a meaningful way, or a way that would need those choices to be reflected in the game. Okay, again, absolutely illogical. There are several characters from those previous games that have been placed into Winter and are at one of the locations that they said you can visit. Like, you have for Tevinter, Fenris has been there for a while, especially in like the comic. Fenris is just there like taking out mages anyway. You think he's not gonna get involved in this at all? That's a Dragon Age 2 choice. You have Dorian. There's nothing about Dorian or his relationship with the Inquisitor. He's 100% into Winter and getting involved with this situation because he, from the start, was like, I need to make a change. I want to make a reform for Tevinter and da-da-da-da-da. Why he would not be in this game and wouldn't have choices pertaining to him does not make sense. That's completely illogical. They said we were going to go to Wysop. There's several wardens that we've met throughout the course of the game that could be alive and well in Wysop, especially if you only consider Inquisition. Alistair could be at Wysop. Hawk could be at Wysop. Hawk's sibling could be at Wysop. Those are just 3 off the top that could be there. And then you say we're going to go to Ravane, and there's no mention of Isabella, the one character who has been in the last 3 previous games from Ravane. The pirate queen herself isn't going to make an appearance when we're trapezing about her country. That doesn't make any sense. You even have a faction called the Lords of Fortune. Izzy isn't gonna get involved in that? You trying to tell me that's not in her, like, character? To be involved in a faction called the Lords of Fortune when she stole a Kunari relic? Dude. And then there's a whole thing about the Kunari showing up in Veilguard 2. We have several like Kunari that could be like well, not several. We have a few Kunari that could show up. If Iron Bull's still alive, he'd probably want to get involved with all of that, considering the events that happened to him. Then could be an era shock and could be on the opposing side, and that could have been some cool tension you could have wrote into the story for characters, or like some people wouldn't even care, just like, oh, is this random dude? Why does this Kunari not have horns? But you could have put Stan in there and people would have seen like, oh crap, freaking Stan, we gotta fight against him in this game. That could have been cool. But you're like, no, that's not relevant. And like, okay, let's say Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, not relevant to Veilguard. What about Inquisition? There were so many choices in Inquisition as I was playing it where I was just going, how are they going to account for this? This is way too big to just be put off to the wayside. This is like a crazy big choice that you are making. Every ending to a story beat, I was like, this is gonna be freaking wild. Like, you have at the very beginning choosing if you're going to get the assistance of the mages or the Templars in Inquisition, and that changes your entire secondary antagonist for the rest of the game. That's a huge difference. There's a whole different sets of quest lines involving them. And then you have the choice at Adamant to exile the wardens or keep them in Ferelden. That feels like it would make a big difference if the blight is happening and the apocalypse is occurring that involves a bunch of darkspawn and old gods. That seems like a choice that would be very relevant to the situation at hand. We also have the choice of the Well of Sorrows, which a lot of people have also talked about. Why isn't it there? Because that was made to be a huge choice that you can make, is who is going to absorb the knowledge from the Well of Sorrows. And you even have Morrigan in the game. Like that, no, that's a whole nother thing. Let's go into that now. You say that none of the choices from the previous games make sense to put in here, but you have two characters that have been through multiple other installments that require choices to basically shape who they are and how they interact with the world. Morrigan's been around since Origins. Like, she has so many different relationships to so many different characters in this game, and events that can happen to her that would drastically change her outlook and what she can do, what she's restricted to in Veilguard. Varric can also have so many different like variations of what can happen to him based on what happens in Dragon Age 2 and what happens in Dragon Age Inquisition. His best friend could be dead or missing. So you think he's not gonna mention that at all? He's not going to mention any of the previous characters. He's not going to mention any of the other events that happened in Inquisition. Varric, the person who's known for telling stories? Like, to me, that just makes me feel like they're going to like kill these two characters immediately as soon as the game starts, so they don't have to deal with any of the choices surrounding them if they only have 3 choices. It's a weird thing for them to say just, oh, we don't have the choices because it's not relevant. How are they not relevant? What is this story then? How can you tell this story with nothing in like the south part of this map just ever mattering? Also, another big choice from Inquisition is who you picked to be the next Divine. Who is Divine Victoria? Because you had 3 different choices with 3 very different ideologies and ways to run the Chantry. That seems like it would take into like account the events of Veilguard. Like, that interweaves into what's going on. The veil has been torn asunder and is infecting the current like reality. There are demons showing up. There are old gods showing up. Freaking magisters and stuff that supposedly like went into the Black City and started the Blight in the first place. All of this stuff revolves around the Chantry. The Chantry does not just exist in Southern Thedas. And even though T-Venter has a Black Divine, that doesn't mean like there's no Chantry reach in Antiva. There's no Chantry reach over in the Anderfels. There's no Chantry reach in Ravane. Even though they have their own customs and religions and stuff there, it still reaches there. So you're saying none of these people are gonna even slightly mention the divine and what the divine has done, especially since one of the candidates for divine can be a mage for the first time ever. That would like shake the entire foundation of Thetis, I feel. That wouldn't have just been like, oh, it's not gonna affect anyone. No, that's gonna affect a lot of things. If you put a mage on the Sunburst throne, how is that not relevant? How? That doesn't make any sense. Like, what are they on about? I don't understand. So, if none of those choices are relevant to the actual apocalypse occurring, what is? What matters from the previous game? You would think if the absorption of an old god soul isn't relevant to the actual apocalypse where eldritch horrors are attacking the world because of the person who could absorb the old god soul, then what is relevant? What? What exactly are you doing with this story? Like, where is it going? It literally makes no sense, no matter how you look at it. So, there is a hope. It's a small hope, but it's a hope that I have. I hope that the 3 choices that we have had leaked are not the only 3 choices in the entire game, because they could have just given you more choices as the game goes on rather than having you pick them all at the very beginning. To me, that would make sense, and it wouldn't be super daunting to new players of the game. It could only take important things for important sections, because they did say it was kind of like a mission structure almost for a lot of like the acts and things. So let's say you're going into the mission at Weissopt. Okay, now you have choices to affect what happens at Weissopt when you get there. Like, who could be there? Are these wardens alive? Are they dead? And that's gonna like kind of prep you for what's gonna happen at Weissopt. It takes a little bit of the surprise away, but it's not as daunting for new players. So I guess that's an okay trade-off. If you just like, okay, let's like spread out the big choices across the game and not have you go through like an hour's worth of picking what happened over 3 previous games. That's fine. That makes sense to me. And if it's easier that way for them to continue importing choices through just having people be like, hey, what happened in the last game? Once you get to a certain part, picking what happened and then moving on, that's totally fine. I'm okay with that. But if it's only 3 choices for the entire game, and that's going to shape the entire story, then I can't see BioWare continuing as a company, because that was the thing that made their games unique. It was the seeing your choices and the consequences of those choices play out over an extended period of time. And I'm not talking like a few weeks or a month of in-game time. I'm talking years upon years. So you can see, okay, I put someone on a throne. How are they doing like 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line? What are the consequences of this? And you were able to kind of see those tiny little ripples throughout the world in the other games in the series. You had tiny bits in Dragon Age 2 I did not expect to show up at all. And that was part of the fun, was seeing little mentions of things that happened from the previous game. Because in Dragon Age 2, there is a point where you can just run into someone who used to be a werewolf regarding the quest in Dragon Age Origins. Like, if you save them and turn them back into humans. And it's like, whoa, okay. Like, that had like far-reaching kind of consequences. Some of the people who escaped ended up over there in Kirkwall. And then there's the Grey Warden letter that you intercept and have to basically get back to them because someone was trying to like stop it from getting into the Grey Warden's hand, which is basically a note from Avernus, who was part of like one of the DLCs for Origins, who was trying to find a cure for the blight for Grey Wardens. And you actually could drink a vial that gave you like Grey Warden blood powers in that DLC. And you can find a note from him, and that note changes depending on if you allowed him to do his experiments freely or if you said he could only do ethical experiments from now on to try and find a cure for the blight. And that was wild to like see that like bit of reactivity. And so for them to say that little bit of reactivity to previous choices wasn't worthy doesn't seem right, because I enjoyed those little tiny bits of codexes or tiny notes or just hearing people talk about things in passing that reference previous games. Even if they're small, you could know that they still exist. And I think that's what a lot of people are now like upset about, because those tiny bits actually mean a lot over the course of the game. And if they wanted to do a clean slate, like I said, they could have tied everything up in this game. They could have tied it up, made it one big like Avengers get together of a bunch of the previous companions, whoever's still alive, and previous like main characters and stuff, and just if you want to kill them off in a blaze of glory in this game, it would have been the place to freaking do it, because an apocalypse is occurring. I don't know what other scenario would be more fitting to kill off a bunch of main characters than the literal like apocalypse with eldritch monstrosities plaguing the freaking world. Like what, where else you gonna do this? This would have been a perfect time to tie up all of the loose ends from the previous games. Even the other DLCs in Inquisition spoke on some crazy things, like the Titans. Y'all remember the Titans storyline that was occurring with the living lyrium? I was expecting that to be tied up here too, but yeah, who knows now? I'm really hoping those three choices are not the only three, because if they are the only three, BioWare just shot themselves in the foot. They put themselves out the pasture. I feel like it's gonna severely impact people wanting to engage with Mass Effect as well. The new one that they were trying to work on, it was supposed to be a continuation of Shepard's Tale, which I already didn't know how they were gonna pull that off. But if that's the case and you're not going to see things pass over and you're just kind of using the name to try and get sales, then it's not going to work. This is going to be the last one, especially if people play through it and you're like, yeah, nothing really matters. This isn't good. That isn't good. Like BioWare has to like hit this out of the park to continue existing at this point, because they've gotten rid of and like lost so many people, and EA has never been known to keep companies doing well. And everyone thought that BioWare was dead as soon as EA even touched them. The fact that they've made it this long is rather impressive on its own, but I think this would be the nail in the coffin if they literally disregarded like over 100 choices made throughout the series for a game that's a direct continuation of the previous game, which had at least 7, I think, major choices that should have been reflected in Veilguard. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a rando on the internet. Have a beautiful day.